All right. So can you hear me okay? Yeah.
I can hear you perfectly fine, yes.
Okay, brilliant. So I'll just get going then, Daz. Um, so it's a real pleasure to uh, have spend some time with Daz Smith, who I've been a fan of for a while, and I'm sure most of you out there know Daz's work. So Daz, thank you ever so much for agreeing to do this. Um, Now, there's lots to get through, Daz. So first of all, I suppose the kind of obvious beginning is for you to talk about um, you know what happened. So I've been speaking. Hold on, sorry, Daz. Can I just one thing I want to ask you? So I'm going to kind of obviously cut there. Let me just
No
pause
worries.
this actually. Okay, so it is my pleasure to spend some time with Daz Smith. Daz, thank you ever so much for agreeing to take part in this. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, Daz, let's begin at the obvious beginning, which is, how you got into remote viewing, and maybe considering your mother's kind of psychic abilities.
Mhm.
Is it
Yep.
possible just to kind of lay that out first, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm luckier than most people that I find within remote viewing in that I had an education all my life in all kinds of psychic endeavors. I grew up in a household where my mother was a practicing healer, channeler, medium, and clairvoyant. And she also ran the local spiritualist church here in Bath for probably a decade or two. Um, so I was lucky in the fact that if you're lucky enough to grow up in a home that has a library, the library we had of books were all books on psychic development and spiritualism, and pretty much all kinds of mysteries. Egypt, Yori Geller, all that kind of stuff.
Uh,
So for me, I started getting an interest in paranormal studies from around about the age of 10. I remember reading a series of books at junior school over and over, and it was books on UFOs and ghost stories, that kind of thing. So it was pretty basic stuff, but it held my interest even then. And then from the age of 15 onwards, I took formal training in what I call the classical techniques. So that would involve mediumship, channeling, scrying using all different kinds of methods like crystal balls, sand, tea leaves, tarot cards,
uh,
and then other things like clairvoyance, a bit of healing, a bit of mediumship, and that kind of stuff. And then I got into UFO research in around about 1989 because we had a big wave of crop circles here in the UK, which astounded me at the time. So I got into crop circles, and then obviously UFOs followed crop circles closely behind. And at a UFO conference in Leeds in 1992, I heard a tape being played. It was a taped conversation between two people in the US, and one of the US people said that he was a remote viewer and he worked for the government, and that they could go anywhere in time and space. It's psychic kind of investigation. So from that point onwards, really, I made it my life's goal to learn remote viewing, and yeah, so from 1992 to present day, that's pretty much what I've been doing.
yeah. So that's really interesting. I mean, in my folks, I started doing this because my folks wrote a book about reincarnation, and so I was kind of brought up in a household where certainly reincarnation was just like a kind of an established fact.
Yeah.
Um, Now, when you heard that tape and uh, you found out about remote viewing, what was different in terms of how you thought about remote viewing from all of the other, divinations and the classical approaches?
Yeah. Well, for me, from the age of 15 onwards, when I really started getting heavily into the psychic work, on request of my mum or on her advice, really, I started keeping a kind of like a psychic diary of all my intuitive dreams and just thoughts, random thoughts and stuff that were coming into my head. And I still had the diary now. And at the age of, I think, 15 and a half, I wrote a page in this diary about how one day I would find this psychic technique which would allow me to time travel with my mind. And that was in
Wow,
1985, 7 years before I even found remote viewing. So
that's
the moment
amazing.
I actually found it, for me personally, is almost, I can't use any other word than this is my destiny and what I'm
Yeah,
meant to be doing.
yeah. Everything clicked into place.
It did, yes, yes. And once I didn't know it in the time in 1992, but once I did a lot more research, and I found out about how the Americans had developed specific methods for remote viewing, and then I tried it and saw that it really does allow you to be in control of psychic information. Whereas all the classical techniques, generally, the flow of information is in control of you. It's very spontaneous. But
Right.
once I saw that the remote viewing technique that I trained in, called CRV, or controlled remote viewing, gave you absolute control over the process, I abandoned all the other techniques because they just paled in reflection.
Yeah. And had your mother, um, did it take a while for your mum to like find her her place, if you like? Did she try out other things before settling on so how which she was a psychic, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in her last few years, she did a lot of personal readings for people, and she did a lot of personal development work, and even going to their residences and clearing negative spirits and energies, that kind of
Uh,
work. So I would say that was her end goal and the focus of her life doing that. And she also frequented Glastonbury every weekend, and she had an aura camera down there, and she used to do aura readings and pictures for people.
yeah. Oh, fantastic. And so growing up in that kind of house, did you ever have any paranormal experiences?
Yeah, yeah, all the time. From a very early age, I think I was about 5 years old. We moved from one house to the house I'm living in to this day, because this was my parents' house, and I've lived in this house here now for 40 plus years. And we moved from that old place to this place because of almost like poltergeist activity. But looking
Oh,
back on it now, knowing what I know, it was probably because we were growing up in a household where my mother had abilities, and us as growing up children also started to have abilities. And you find that poltergeist type activity does seem to center around young children and children moving into their teens.
right, I see. Okay, so and did you so that you do make a connection between your abilities and your family's abilities and the activity.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And so is that kind of a connection that's like others have made? Is that a common relationship?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's even more so of late in some books that have been released, and in the studies around an area in America called Skinwalker Ranch, and what they found with the paranormal activities that happens at this ranch. And to be honest, it's been recorded for 30 years in other books as well, especially one by Jacques Vallée. He wrote a book. I think it was the psychic connection or something, psychic UFO connection.
Hmm.
But people have noted, going back now decades, but more so in Skinwalker Ranch stuff, because they had scientists actually record that people that have encounters with UFOs or orbs or very strong paranormal encounters, they also pass those encounters on to their family and close friends. And the scientists have even managed to study this now, and they've even managed to map the virus rate of the exposure and how these paranormal activities spread.
That's amazing. So
Yeah.
that's George Knapp's book and Com Kelleher.
Yes, it's in that
Yeah,
book, and there's another book as well, but yeah, it's in that book as well. Yes,
right. That's incredible. I didn't know that they'd mapped it.
yes,
I mean, this leads on to a question that I've got uh, later on, but the trickster element.
yeah,
I know that in one of your YouTube videos, I think a couple of months ago, you were talking about the trickster in relation to a lottery winning. You
yes,
remember
yes,
that?
yes, yeah.
Can you say something about that or about like this kind of trickster element at all, please?
Yeah, it's nothing. It's nothing that I can. solidly say there's absolute proof for it. It's just a theory of mine, and I've heard other people have similar theories. But it almost seems like when we feel like we're getting close to knowing what remote viewing is, or knowing what anything to do with paranormal research is, including UFO studies, it seems to flip on its head, as if there is some kind of unseen guiding force that seems to have an influence on everything that's been done. And I think that's definitely for involves me and any of the people out there that are trying to win, or when we have tried to win, up teen amounts of hundreds of millions on the lottery and stuff, because I can, I have a great rate of accuracy of, and my accuracy on general targets is well over 80% accurate, more than 80% of the time that I do targets. But, if I tried
Yeah.
to do a run of trying to win 150 million on the Euro Millions, I just don't, my accuracy rate instantly goes down. And,
Right. Wow.
there has to be a reason from that other,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there is this trickster element that seems to be involved in all kind of paranormal elements across the board, and I'm including UFOs and everything in that. It's almost like I would have to say that there is a conscious entity out there that switches things around, likes to play around, likes to keep us guessing.
Right. Yeah. And also a kind of suggest there's a kind of overview, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. Um, and of course we don't know um really how. Is it right to say that we don't really know how remote viewing works?
Absolutely, yeah. We're still in the dark. I personally think it might one day be unveiled that it has something to do with just pure physics and quantum, quantum entanglement, or
Yeah.
or entanglement of all things in the universe. I think
Yeah.
I think that's the best theory that I've seen so far that seems to fit. But generally, we still, yeah, we have no idea what's going on with any of this.
So this idea that we're all connected,
Yes,
and also um, this idea that everything, like everything possible, if you like,
yes,
is accessible
yes,
in different ways. There's
absolutely.
different ways of getting into the field, as
Yes,
Grant
yes,
Cameron calls it,
yeah.
accessing the field.
And I liken it to, because I'm a '70s kid growing up. I liken it to the Star Wars films and the Force. They
Yeah,
say there's a force that exists in everything in the universe,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the Jedi's in the Star Wars just tap into it, and that's what we're all doing as human beings. We are all part of this force. It's just that me as a remote viewer, I've spent the last 3 decades concentrating and honing just one skill, every single week, several times a week, so that when these very, very subtle psychic impressions come into my body, um, I'm just able to interpret them slightly better than someone who hasn't spent 30 years learning how to interpret their body signals.
Yes. And I've got a question about that. I'm interested in the relationship because you're an artist,
Yes,
and Ingo Swann obviously painted,
yes,
and I know that there's this kind of study going on with Gary Nolan about intuition.
yeah,
And I wonder, is there some kind of connection, do you think, between intuition and and creativity?
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I'm absolutely convinced that being a successful, because for all of my working career, I've been a graphic designer,
Yeah.
and I design logos and corporate branding, that kind of thing. And I'm absolutely convinced that the fact that I'm so good at that is because I can get inside the head of knowing what the client wants better than the next person down the line. And the
Yeah.
feeling the feeling I get when the inspiration for a logo or whatever it is comes to mind, for a creative endeavor, and even the photography I do, the creative inspiration from that feels exactly the same as when I get a creative burst, or an inspirational burst of energy when doing something intuitive like remote viewing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And that reminds me of this thing that well we now know is Gary Nolan in that amazing book, American Cosmic, which I'm reading at the moment, he's called James in that book, isn't he? But
Yeah.
he's kind of Gary's come out saying, "Oh, it's me," and he talks about how if he's got a problem, he will kind of try to um, like dissemble it as best he can
Yeah.
as he's going to bed, like kind of going to sleep in bed,
Yes. Yeah.
and um, and then as he puts it, he kind of lets the elves work on it through the
Yeah.
night, and then invariably in the morning, at some point the next morning, we'll think, oh yeah, that's what I need to do. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's really interesting. Now, recently on your YouTube channel, which I'm going to kind of put links on all of the things that we discuss, because
Okay.
I'd
Yeah.
like to discuss some of the cases, like the UFO cases, for instance, in a moment. But recently you were talking about flow. Somebody wrote to you about why you've got the word flow in your
Yeah.
thing. And I thought it was really interesting what you said about Zen in that video. Could you just talk a little bit about that and how that kind of practice has come into your remote viewing practice,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah. Um, it probably reaches back for me as well because as far as far as I was into psychic endeavors all my life, I was also a keen martial artist as well, and I trained in a normal Shotokan karate for a number of years, then full contact karate, which I got to a black belt level in. Then I did kung fu, self defense, tai chi, qigong. So I've been involved in all those kind of endeavors for a long time. But tai chi and qigong and even meditation of a sort, they're all very similar, and they allow you to get in touch with your body and the field, the energy field, or the chi energy, or the force, the
Mm,
field, whatever you want to call it.
mm,
So I've been doing that for probably about a decade or more, and encompassing that within my remote viewing work as well. And yeah, the flow itself around the Zen practice, especially the Zen practice of where they draw the characters, and the characters that they're drawing encompasses their entire feeling, is very much like what we do in remote viewing with the what we call the ideogram process,
mm.
where we initially get the spark of contact with the target and we spontaneously do a doodle or sketch. It all seems to be the same thing, but looking from it from different perspectives in the world. So that's what it is for me, really. I call it I call what I do the flow now, because I'm trying to differentiate myself from the practice of controlled remote viewing, because a lot of people within the field of remote viewing don't allow you to move outside the boundaries of what Ingo Swann taught in 1985.
Mhm.
And I feel that we should be expanding what we're doing. We should be working more symbiotically with the process, and we're all individuals as well. So what works for me or what works for a person that I'm mentoring might not have been what worked when Ingo Swann came up with what we call remote viewing in 1985. So yeah, I just see the whole process as a flowing process, and that's what it's like for remote viewing, because you start off with a very small spark of information, and just by investigating it, you open up this flow of information that kind of flows through you, flows through everything, and just allows you this access to everything in the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine that meditation is a part of
Yes.
your kind of you meditate, I
I
take
used to
it.
meditate more. I do it
Yeah,
less now, but that's because I've become so busy with the remote viewing. But
sure.
for at least 2 decades, the first 2 decades, I would always do at least something like a 10 to 20, 30 minute meditation before every single remote viewing session. Nowadays, I'm quite lucky in the fact that I guess I've been doing it so long, I can sit down at the table where I'm going to do my reviewing, and sometimes it's just here where I'm sat right now, and I can literally just go into my mind and just calm myself, and then with just taking a one single deep breath, I can relax my entire body, so I can kind of bypass the entire needing to do a 20-minute meditation process. But
Right, yeah.
meditation for most people is an amazing process, and it is the key to all kinds of
Yeah.
experiences with the universe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean it's because one of the things that I find difficult to um comprehend is the enormity of it all, if you like. There's a kind of potential there.
Yes.
Essentially, you can place yourself at any point in time, space. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
uh, the past, the future.
Yeah.
Anywhere, like geographically. And so I imagine, I mean, the thing about you, Daz, is that you're so basically, like, you seem so totally unflusterable, if that is a word. And I'm sure that's not, sometimes, of course, you're a human being, but at the same time, I would be so overwhelmed by,
It's not
and
always
I
been the
imagine,
case, though. Yeah, I
right,
would say 10, because you get to a stage, you do this, and at first you're a skeptic of your own ability. You're like, will this
yeah,
work? And then it starts to work, and after you've done 100, 200 experiments, and they all, the majority of them work, you get to a stage where it's very hard. It's almost like you're flicking a light switch. The light switch goes on, and you're like, oh my god, this is so real. I can do anything. I can go anywhere in time and space. And then for a period of weeks or months, you're on a high with that. You're like, oh my god, there's no
yeah,
limitations. Um, but after working at this 3, 4, 5 times a week, every week for month after month, year after year, that kind of wears off. And at the moment, what I'm doing is essentially my full time job as well. Remote
yeah,
viewing is my full time job. So
yeah,
I have to be honest. Some of the mystery of it sometimes kind of moves on, and it is just like I am on like a treadmill of work. I do one project, publish it, do all the creative side of getting the videos out and stuff, and then I'm literally moving on to the next one. So I don't have an awful lot of time to contemplate that. But
sure,
sometimes on in a quiet moment, I'm in the shower or I'm going to sleep at night, and you think on it. You think you know there are no limit. With remote viewing, we found no limitations to going anywhere in time and space and getting any kind of information. Although, as a caveat, I do have to say that we have found, and not just me, but everyone finds that looking at future stuff is inherently less accurate than looking at present and past stuff.
yes. Why do you think that might be?
I think it's probably, I think as humans we try to simplify things too much. I think it probably is a scale of things that's happening, and I think for myself, the group of people that I'm with, for example, like crypto viewing, our business, because when we look at, because every month myself and the team always look ahead a month and then put all our predictions out to the people that are subscribing to us. So on projects like that, I feel that because we're making our data public and there are an awful lot of people paying for that data and then spreading it around, that there's a good possibility that there are people acting on that information. I feel that in some of the cases, they probably are changing the future by acting on the information that we provide up front.
Right.
But I also think that other parts of this scale that are happening is that there are, I think in the future there's like multiple probabilities of an event that might happen in different scenarios, and the closer you get to that event, the probabilities collapse until within
Yeah.
half a second before that event, it's probably only one probability left. So yeah, so I think that kind of thing happens
That's
as well.
really interesting.
And
Yeah.
I believe as well that it's possible that people looking at things in the future might be able to influence things in the past, and all different kinds of things happening out there. There may even be destiny elements involved that we're not, not just my destiny, but other people's destinies.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's a scale of a lot of different things that are hindering the future information being as accurate as predicting or looking at
Yeah.
past and present.
So that idea that you're kind of tasked to find out what's going to happen in a month,
Yeah.
it's quite difficult to get it, but you get something, you send it off, and then
Yes.
people act upon it before the month takes
Yes.
place.
Yes.
And which means that that's one of the reasons why it was difficult to get.
Yes.
That's
Because
really
because people,
it's
is
Christopher Nolan needs to watch
absolutely,
this.
yeah. Because if enough people act on the information you put out,
Yeah,
you're essentially you are changing the future. So that event you're forecasting might not happen,
yeah,
or it might
exactly.
happen slightly less than you've said, or
Yeah,
slightly
yeah, yeah,
more than
yeah.
you've said. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. And one thing that kind of remote viewers saying, I'm sure I've heard you say, is that everybody's got the ability, but obviously that ability is different in the same
Yeah.
way that everybody can play football, but not
Yes.
all of us are Harry Kane. Um, Now that's I bring that up because I've been doing this podcast for a year, and in that time, it's given me license to talk to people
Yeah.
about the paranormal. And I'm sure you've had, 25 years of this, but for me, it's quite new, to
Right.
talk to
Okay.
people
Yeah.
about the paranormal. And it is absolutely extraordinary the number of people who say, well, actually, and
Yeah.
then they say, like literally everyone I've spoken to, either themselves or someone that they totally trust, like
Yeah.
parent or, someone that's not going to muck them about, basically,
Yeah.
has had something, a wide range of different things from UFOs to ghosts to this and that. But it makes me wonder about this question of the stigma, you know, and what life would be like, and what society would be like if that stigma was removed all of a sudden, and people that have paranormal experiences don't feel embarrassed to talk about it.
Yeah.
Essentially, you know,
Yeah.
it's just not a question really, but not just kind of thing to think about, I suppose.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's that would be an interesting scenario. But you have to remember that intuitives or creatives or psychic people, especially in Europe, they've been, hunted and burned at the
Yeah,
stake as witches
yeah,
and stuff for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. So if you think back to that, just think how much ability we've actually taken out of society and killed.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely,
But if you do research into and I've read books and done research on some of the top CEOs in business, for example, um, a lot of them will tell you that they've got to their position or they've done the perfect deal or they've got their riches from mainly following their gut feeling or their gut instinct, and that
right,
in essence is it's just your intuition. So just
yeah,
listening to your gut feeling about someone that you meet in the street, whether you like them or you don't like them or you feel they're a little bit off,
yeah,
that's just as much as an ability as what I'm doing. Other than I've spent 30 years listening to my gut feeling that little bit more than the general person. So
yeah, yeah,
so I know how to read it that little bit better.
yeah. That's a really good point, actually. Yes. Um, one thing in terms of like what you do in remote viewing. I've just realized that we haven't really basically said what it is. So essentially, I mean, I'm the guy to say, I don't know why I'm saying it, but essentially you've got this, you're given a target.
Yes.
Target is now the numbers really interest me.
Okay.
It's not always that you're assigned numbers, or is it that numbers are always involved?
We're generally before we go there, let me just say a little bit.
Yeah,
Being a remote viewer is not much different than being a classical psychic or clairvoyant and stuff. The only real difference we have is that we work within a set of rules or protocols. And these rules are number one that the target must be blind,
yeah,
so we don't know anything about the target up front. Number two, it cannot be spontaneous, so it has to be a project that's actually set up and recorded. Number three, the data has to be recorded, so you can verify it later. And the most important one really is there needs to be an element of feedback after the project to assess the remote viewing against to see if you are accurate or not. So essentially, I'm a psychic and like anyone else or an intuitive, but for 30 years I've agreed to do all my work within that set of rules, and that essentially what makes it remote viewing.
yeah,
But the numbers, yeah. So the numbers are, and they're just for admin purposes, really. They mean nothing. So if someone wants me to do a target, they can't come to me and say, "Daz, I want you to remote view. I don't know the London Tower, in the Tower
of
Bridge in
course,
London,"
yeah, yeah,
because they're telling you what it is.
yeah,
So
yeah,
essentially, they write that down on a piece of paper or they record it somewhere, and they just assign a random set of numbers to it. And I'm given that random set of numbers to essentially work upon. And it's just for admin purposes as well. So that, if I'm talking to you, if you were my project manager, you could say, Daz, have you done target XXX1234?
Mm.
So it's just for that reason. And I have to be honest, a lot of the time I don't even use the numbers that people give me.
Right.
So I'll just say, okay, I'm focusing on the target that Mike wants me to do. I'm
Yeah.
going to use today's date as my focus numbers, and I just write the
I
date. And
see. Okay, I see.
the thing that connects it all together, and we don't know how this works. This is where I think it's all to do with the interconnectedness of the universe. Is my intent connects with, if you were the tasker, your intent, and
Yes.
then everyone else's intent, and the intent of the universe all connects in this giant web, and it allows the information to flow in some way.
Yeah, and that's non-local, obviously. You don't need to
Yes,
be,
yes.
but because I was under the impression that the numbers were something you kind of focused on somehow in order to access things, but it's not
When you're
quite
a
that.
beginner, I would say when you're a beginner, you kind of use it as your focal point to, like, imagine yourself going to the target. And this is something else as well. Um, in the 30 years I've been doing this, and in all my years of research, and I've looked at hundreds of thousands of remote viewing sessions, all the ones released under the CIA and the Stargate, all the Ingo Swan archives, everything. I have never seen any evidence yet that shows that a remote viewer or a psychic actually travels to a target to get information. I think what just happens is I'm sat here at my desk, and I literally just sit here at the desk with, it used to be a pack of paper and a pen, but nowadays I just do it on a tablet. I literally just sit at the desk, and I just open myself up and connect, and actually all the data about everything in the universe is actually already within us as individuals. So I'm not going out anywhere. I'm just accessing the data that's actually interconnected within me.
It's amazing.
It
That's
is
that's
is amazing when you think of it. Yes, yes,
it really is amazing. Yeah, there's no question about that. And then when you're doing a remote viewing, often when I watch your videos, you say AOL, and
yeah,
that is analytic overlay. So
yes.
that's when you're giving your interpretation of something rather than describing it.
Yeah,
Is that
it's when, because we have I have a process where I can see it, or we record the information as it comes in. And the whole premise of the technique that Ingo Swan came up with was that you try to describe the targets but not identify them, because once you try to
yeah?
identify them, that's when you make mistakes.
Uh-huh.
So if the target was a car or a bus, you wouldn't say, "Oh, I see a bus." You would try to say, you try to say, "Okay, it feels like it's metallic, feels like it's long, feels like it's red, feels like it has four circular black, smells like rubber wheels, feels like this. The whole thing might be moving. It might be a vehicle." You can say vehicle because what you're describing could be a bus, but it could also be a tractor, or it could also be a
Hmm.
lorry, or it could
Hmm.
be a car. But we try not to say outright naming what the target is. And if it does pop in your head, if you do get the word pop in or the feeling pop in, this is a bus, this is a bus. We then go to the side of the paper and we write AOL, which is analytical overlay, and we just write it underneath that, just as a way of recording it really, and letting it escape from our mind so that it doesn't fester.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing you say that you never edit yourself, you're just going to put everything down.
Yes, within remote viewing, you've got the right and draw every single film, never self censor, because you'll find that, and I've done this myself in training, that you'll do a remote viewing session and you'll censor some data. You say, "Oh, I'm not writing that because that's just stupid," and then you'll get the feedback afterwards, and it'll be exactly what you didn't write down.
Right? Yeah, 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 yeah. Totally. Um, Now, I'm quite keen on talking about some of the cases that you've been doing in terms of UFO
Okay.
stuff, if you don't mind.
Yeah, happy
Um,
to.
Before we get to that, I've got a question about this idea of the shadow biosphere. So the idea of life that we have not yet perceived
Yeah.
being kind of like on the planet essentially.
Yes.
And of course, as we get better at developing technologies that can detect things, and
Yeah.
science is obviously constantly, getting better at doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What's your impression of, because we'll talk about some of the cases with extraordinary, targets that you've, um, had.
Yes.
What's your impression of that idea? Like, Bigelow's idea that, they're right under our nose.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I got into remote viewing, with my classical psychic techniques, I was part of a classical psychic development group. So it was a circle of psychics that used to meet once a week, and we used to go off into the universe through some kind of envisioned portal to have experiences. And in 10 years of doing that, I had all kinds of very strange experiences of all different kinds of life forms. I wrote all this up in a book called Surfing the Psychic Internet, but it's nothing to do with remote viewing. It's just like psychic channeling explorations. But that taught me that there's just a huge kind of zoo of life of all different types and shapes, some good, some bad, all interacting not just with us here on Earth, but with life forms on all different levels. And these are physical, non-physical, very strange kinds of stuff. Yeah, so I think there's lots of stuff all around us. Um, and the vast majority of what we're seeing with all the latest UAP or UFO stuff, I don't think that's extraterrestrial. For me, it's more interdimensional.
Yeah, yeah, I think that too.
Yeah,
Um, that's really interesting, and I'll um, find information about that book that you
it's
wrote. And
it's out there. I don't really promote it because it's not remote viewing. Um, but you might find it interesting because I did record all the experiences I had during psychic development, and I did have these kind of ongoing what's the right word, battles maybe with these shadowy grey type, no, shadowy black type life forms that didn't want us to expand our consciousness. So there are ones out there that,
well,
like angel type guides that do want us to
yes,
advance and do want
uh,
us to open up, but there are also other ones out there that are trying to hinder us at the same time, don't want us to expand our consciousness and be part
right.
of this universal community.
Okay, that's really fascinating. Yes, and maybe a good way of getting into one of the cases that I want to talk to you about. First one is JFK,
Okay,
the
yeah,
incredible, I mean, absolutely extraordinary, one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen, whereby you're at your whiteboard
yeah,
for that particular video, and you follow JFK through the point where he's assassinated into the afterlife.
yes, yeah,
And I mean, it's very, I'm sure about NDEs,
yeah,
very, familiar territory to
yes,
people that know about, NDE testimonies.
yeah,
Um, I mean, I don't really, there's no question really, but I mean, it's just, I mean, how, I suppose what, it does, I guess, jump back to that thing about the kind of overwhelming,
mm,
the potential for it being
yes,
overwhelming. I
yeah.
mean, can you remember, like, how did it feel to, have that experience?
Yeah, and a bit of a background on that as well, that because that video is on YouTube now, um, but that actual segment, which was recorded live, it was one of the instances, where I have done, and we still do on occasion, do the, we're blind to the target still, so we have whiteboards, and we doing our remote viewing live on a whiteboard, and
Yeah,
we're pointing a video camera at ourselves as we're doing it. So it was one of those, but that whole segment in that video was actually uh, a film segment that was cut out of the original video that I did for Farsight, because in the original video, all Courtney was interested in was us as remote viewers actually getting information on the target itself, which was the assassination of Kennedy.
yeah,
So the fact that I went off, because I literally, to be honest, I actually went slightly off target with that one. And through that death process, that wasn't is actually part of the target. So, but yeah, so it ended up on the cutting room floor, and I said to Dick Haugar, who also worked the project with me, it's a real shame that this is not being seen because it's an interesting adventure. So we made our own video of that. But yeah, you're right. It was the only time that I've ever done that, and it was a really shocking and interesting experience for me because I don't know, and I still don't know, even after experiencing that. I have to be honest, and even in involving all my years I did with mediumship and stuff, I still don't know how I truly feel about if there is life after death. I see a
Really?
quandary because I know that as a psychic, I can get information on anything in the universe anyway. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, are mediums just tapping into the same information as I am, but just interpreting it differently?
Uh-huh.
So I still don't know if I truly believe in life after death. I think I'm slowly getting there, and I think that the overwhelming wealth of information is kind of proving it to me that there is that the energy of us does exist in some way after physical death.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so when I went through that process of seeing, and bear in mind I didn't know it was Kennedy when I was doing the RV session. I had a feeling it was someone being assassinated and killed.
Yeah.
But yeah, to feel the process of someone going through panic, absolute terror and panic and pain, all these thoughts of all these things that are happening, and then for that instantly to just disappear into a nothingness of calmness. That was the biggest shock. That transference of all that noise to silence. I think that was the most kicking thing for me on it.
Right. Thank you for talking about that because it's incredible. Obviously, I'll link it in the episode description. But interesting that even that experience hasn't quite crystallized it for you in terms of, what happens next.
Yeah, because remote viewing is based in science and it's all about um, recording data and then checking that data against known data for accuracy and stuff. I consider myself to be a very amateur scientist in a way, in trying to verify everything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's clouded my viewpoint on everything to do with all kinds of intuition and all kinds of experiences. Really, I need more proof and data to be certain. As I said, as a person that can go out and go anywhere in the universe or known universe to get information in real time, I don't know where the boundaries lie. I don't know if that's what other people are just reporting. When people report past lives, are they just doing
Yeah.
what I'm doing, but they don't know they're doing it?
Right. Yeah. 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 That's really interesting. Another case is Phoenix Lights,
Yeah.
which really interests me as a kind of event.
Okay. Yeah.
Really interesting. And in that case, you had there was this extraordinary bit where you kind of enter the, I don't know, like consciousness or whatever
Mhm.
of the being, like the pilot essentially, the
Yes.
being flying the craft, which again is like, you know, amazing. Can you speak a little bit about? I mean, again, I guess the question is like, what was that like, or what are your kind of recollections of that?
Yeah, to be honest, the recollections of all this kind of fade into one after a while because going into the consciousness of a life form at a target, that's almost like an everyday event for me now. Every week I'm looking at crypto and market targets, looking at companies and the CEOs, and I'm always in the head of them, looking to see what their
Right,
ideas
yeah,
are, where how much money they put in, do they really feel it's confident. So I do remember that was interesting in that I felt that they knew I was there, even though I know I'm not actually going anywhere in time and space. It's almost like yes, their consciousness knew that I was looking at them, and I've never had that really before off a human based life form from any of the targets that I do. As I said, every week I'm looking at CEOs of companies, and in the past I did 250 missing persons cases for the United States Police. I never had a feeling that any of the people or the perpetrators that I was trying to get into the mind of knew anything about me being there. But this life form from the Phoenix Lights did, even though there's a time difference in I was looking at 8 years after the event happened, kind of
yeah.
thing.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I mean, yeah, thank you for mentioning the Find Me work that you did, because of course, I mean, not that people listening to this need to have it verified, but like obviously, if it's if remote viewing is being used by,
Yeah.
police departments across the United States, then
Yes.
it works.
Yeah, not all the time though, and we have to be honest with this. Remote viewing is good. It's better than, I would say, normal psychic abilities, because of those rules or protocols. We can assess on every single remote viewing how accurate it is, and you
Yeah,
can database that at many different levels. Um, I can't remember what the figure was, but at least 30, 40 missing people we helped find through the Find Me group, and they're still working and they're still doing that kind of research now. I
hmm
left them several years ago because after 250 of them, it became a bit run of the mill, and it gets a bit much week after week if all you're seeing is kind of death and mutilation type stuff.
yeah, I
So
bet, I bet,
yeah,
I bet. Talking about uh, craft and consciousness, with Roswell, you spoke about the craft having or the kind of relationship between the beings
yeah,
and the craft, and a kind of, you know, I'm not sure if you use this word, but the kind of some kind of symbiotic
yes, symbiotic
relationship between the
relationship.
two.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, any thoughts?
I've seen that. Yeah,
These are
well,
very bad. I don't have any questions. Have you noticed that?
I've had that experience on because I've done several of these UFO stuff now, including some client related work of late for people interested in UAP research.
Uh-huh.
And the hitchhiker effect as well. I did the hitchhiker effect not long ago as well, for where the paranormal effect follows you home. And
Right.
yeah, but on the Roswell one in particular, um, and in some of the latest ones that I've done as well, it's almost like at the point of production. No, production is not the right word. The point of creation of the UAP craft, or some of the UAP craft. Uh, it's it feels like the DNA or some part of the life form that's driving the craft is actually in the craft, and the craft. Not, I won't say this in all cases, but in some of the cases I looked at, including I think the Roswell one, some of these craft you could almost consider them to be not physically alive as we know humans and stuff, but they are alive in an AI kind of sentient way. And I
Uh-huh.
think they're alive because there is a DNA kind of symbiotic connection there, and there is a mind connection used. So the pilots or the people actually within these craft are actually part of the craft, and the craft is part of them.
Yeah. And so there's this, kind of long established belief that one of the reasons why they can't get anywhere with the craft is because they don't have the other side of how to make the craft work.
Yeah, yeah. I've read that too. So yeah, maybe they need to hire some remote viewers. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. It would be amazing to try that kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's what's happening. That's what it feels like anyway. But as I said, some of the craft that I've seen and experienced aren't, and I think I mentioned it on the Roswell ones. It points as it moves. It's there physically in space and time and space at one point, but then it kind of moves out of focus, and it's not physically in time and space anymore, and then it's back in time and space. It moves in and out. So these craft and life forms they can be physical, non-physical.
Yeah, yeah,
It's hard for us to wrap our heads around, really.
yeah. See, what you just said there reminds me of the Ariel score and the testimony from the kids in the playground when they were
Yeah,
looking. And that extraordinary film that came out a couple of months ago, Aerial Phenomenon, which
yeah,
is
I saw that. Yeah,
amazing. And it's like, some of the kid. Do you remember the figure, the being that was kind of kept running
yeah,
backwards and forwards, and this sense that was very difficult to
yes, yeah,
place them in space or in, geographically.
yeah, definitely, yeah,
And the final case that I would like to talk about is Area 51.
yeah,
And when in your description of Area 51, you've got this extraordinary describing the different layers underground. It's a vast underground network,
yeah,
different levels and different things in the levels. And then you speak about it's like some kind of being encased in a
yeah,
sphere, I think. Is this
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's interesting because the last few weeks, there's been a little bit of kind of not information, but there's been a little bit of people talking a lot in the UAP or UFO community about something that was around in the 70s, and it was in the news back then, and it was called the Betz sphere, and it's these people that found this metallic sphere on their
Yeah,
land, and it used to follow them around and all kinds of stuff. So that's been emerging in the last few weeks. And once I saw the video on that and the description of that Betz sphere, it very much reminded me of the sphere that I saw at Area 51. But as I said
right.
in when I did the session, I don't think they know what they've got. I think this the sphere type object I saw with the sentient kind of AI being inside it was very much hiding and waiting. Yeah, and I don't think it's almost like it was in storage, but they don't know. Yeah, they didn't know what they
Right.
actually had and the capabilities of what that had.
That's incredible.
But again, I can't prove. I can't. The problem with doing a target like that is I can't prove any of that data at this stage.
No, of course.
I mean, we know Area
Absolutely.
51 exists, and the target was giving me blind, so I didn't know I was working Area 51.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we do have testimony from whistleblowers like Lazar and a few other people that kind of does confirm some of my data,
Yeah.
but the data like the sentient alien sphere type thing is very much unproven at this stage. But you have to play the game of if I'm a certain percentage right on most of my other targets, then why would I be
Yeah.
wrong on something like this?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I did an episode about Bob Lazar, and I looked into him, obviously,
yeah,
leading up to the episode. And what convinced me was George Knapp talking about he had 22 people that could verify bits and pieces of
yeah,
Lazar's story, and all of them were threatened,
yeah,
harassed, and they all one by one kind of backed off,
yeah, yeah. I
which was
followed
extraordinary.
I followed that story now since I think I heard about that first in 1989,
Right.
and it hasn't changed in all these decades since. And I followed him and what he's been doing, as much as I could over the years. And as far as I can see, he's never tried to make any money or anything from any of this. His story has never changed, and in fact, it's probably hurt him in his career and everything about him more than it's ever helped him with notoriety. So yeah, and the fact that he did, when he came out of this in the early '80s, he did take George Knapp and John Lear and a few others out into the desert, and they did film
Yeah, yeah,
craft over
yeah,
the
yeah.
desert being tested. How would he have
Absolutely.
known that information? No one else on the planet was giving that information out at that time.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I've
so
got that
I'm a
the
believer, to
audio
be
of
honest.
that in my in the episode.
Yeah,
Yeah, me too, absolutely.
yeah,
And also it kind of like lines up with everything we know about the UAP field,
yes,
like even now, like 20 years later, if it was some kind
absolutely,
of
yeah.
radically different from what Azar was saying, you'd then think what's going on. But
Yes,
all of the anti-gravity, everything
yeah,
essentially,
yeah,
kind of fits with what he was saying. Right. So,
absolutely,
one final thing before I talk about a few other things, but so one question that I have is one thing I'm really interested in is this idea of a kind of um, pre-flood civilization that was kind of like washed away by the flood. This kind of story that pops up in different cultures all around the world. Pre-Diluvian, I think they call it. I knew I
yeah.
was going to butcher that. Pre-Diluvian. And so there's this place in Turkey. Where is it? Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah.
You know about this place?
Interestingly, we just worked that as a target 2 weeks back.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh my God.
I'm not.
What can you say about it?
I'm not actually sure if it's been released. Yeah, we did it through our crypto viewing group, so our patrons or our paying members have probably seen it.
This is a
Um,
good advert to become a victim.
yeah, myself and three other remote viewers all worked the target blind, and
Really?
we all had very interesting data. All my data was indicating on because what the tasker wanted to know is what was the use of the temples.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like, is it 10 or 20 extensive temples or something there?
Yeah.
And they
Something
want
like
to
that.
know the use. And all my data was centered around a communication from something up high above the earth that transmitted inspiration and communication down to a biblical type race of humans. Because, you know, and I had to use the words, it was in like in biblical times. Um, yeah, it was this communication with this. I don't want to say God, but it was like a tech savvy kind of godlike entity type thing that was transforming both physically and spiritually the humans on Earth at that time to progress them.
Well, that's fantastic. And how can we find out more information about this, Daz? Is it we
I know there's probably traders on it on YouTube under our crypto viewing channel.
crypto
There's
viewing?
probably
Okay.
traders showing some of all of us, all four of us, did the remote viewing for this live on whiteboard as well.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah,
So I'll put a link in the episode
yeah.
description.
I mean, I can go away. I can probably try to find you a link to some of the stuff and send it to you for you to incorporate. As I said, I'm not very up on what they've done with it yet because it literally is only a few weeks old.
Just a couple of weeks ago, of
I
course. Yeah.
think our patrons, because we have like a behind our paywall, we have patrons that essentially subscribe to us and essentially allow us to be able to do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
They get to see the stuff first, and then eventually, 6 months to a year later, it filters down, and a lot of it does go on the internet for free.
Uh-huh.
But because it's only like a week or two old, if it's up there already, then yeah, our patrons got it. But I know there are traders that I can send you links to.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I'd appreciate that these days.
Yep.
Um, I mean, that was my main last question, to tell you the truth about it. One thing, maybe if you can just, if the floor is yours, if you like. One thing I haven't spoken about is Eight Martinis,
Okay. Yep.
which, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but it's this extraordinary magazine essentially that you
Yep.
create. So yeah, how can people find you on social media or whatever, or
Yep.
the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, yeah. There's three main areas, well, four really, through crypto viewing, and then there we look at crypto markets and normal markets, and we make news predictions. We do the occasional mysteries target, but that's behind the paywall, so people pay for that kind of content. But that does help support me and the other remote viewers and allows us to do this full time.
Yeah.
The other sources is 8martinis.com, and that's a remote viewing magazine I've done for free for people for I think going on 14 years now, and I think we're just about to do something like issue 19 or something. And they're always good as a good resource, lots of examples.
Yeah.
I also have a YouTube channel called Remote Viewed. There are tons of videos on there with talking with all the leading people within remote viewing, really. And I also have a really extensive, one of the biggest remote viewing websites with hundreds and thousands of pages of free data on, and that's remoteview.com.
Yeah. And your site has got an excellent search facility as well.
Yes,
Just want
yeah.
to like big up the search facility, which is
Yeah,
really helpful if you're,
that's
looking.
Google. Yeah, yeah, because
Yeah.
there's so much stuff on there, and to be honest, it's actually slimmed down. At one point, I had the entire CIA Stargate release, which is 110,000 pages of information. But I've had to slim some of it down now, and not have so much online. But I have on my website loads of videos for people. There's
Yeah.
all the publicly available training manuals and techniques to learn remote viewing. So it's a really good place for anyone to start, really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you ever so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, it's been
So
fun.
thank you ever so much, Daz.